Baffo town slept under the heavy blanket of the dry season, its red earth cracked and thirsty, its people moving slowly through the heat-hazed days. The harmattan wind whispered through the baobab trees, carrying dust from distant deserts and stories from forgotten places. It was a town of routines and rituals, where everyone knew their place and strangers were rare as rain in January. The market square sprawled at Baffo's heart, a colorful chaos of voices, scents, and movement. On this particular Friday, the air hummed with the usual energy, women bargaining fiercely over baskets of tomatoes, men unloading trucks from the city, children chasing chickens through the dust. The scent of frying plantains mingled with the sharp tang of dried fish and the sweetness of overripe mangoes. Then, as the sun reached its zenith, she appeared. She emerged from the heat shimmer near the old cemetery road, a figure so striking that the market's noise faltered, then died completely. Women paused with hands full of produce, men forgot their customers, children stopped their games. Even the chickens seemed to fall silent. She was tall and moved with a grace that seemed to defy gravity, her steps so light they barely disturbed the dust. Her skin was the color of dark honey, glowing as if lit from within. She wore a simple indigo wrapper tied low on her hips, and her bare shoulders gleamed with a light sheen of sweat. But it was her face that held them captive, high cheekbones, full lips, and eyes the color of midnight, tilted slightly at the corners and filled with ancient knowledge. Most striking of all were the beads around her waist, strands of cobalt blue, blood red, and deep gold that clicked together softly as she moved. Shaka shoko, shaka shoko. The sound seemed to weave through the market's noise, both part of it and separate, a rhythm that made hearts beat faster. "I am looking for the market chief," she said, her voice low and musical, carrying easily through the silence. Alhaji Ibrahim, who had been weighing yams for a customer, wiped his hands on his apron and stepped forward. "I am the chief here. How can I help you, daughter?" She smiled, and several men actually sighed. "I am Bilamissèn. I seek a place to stay. I can work, I know herbs and healing." Alhaji Ibrahim studied her, a woman alone with no belongings except the small pouch slung over her shoulder. No husband, no family. In their culture this was unusual, dangerous even. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From beyond the great river," she said vaguely. "My family is gone. I travel alone." The market women exchanged glances. A widow, an outcast, something else. It was old Mama Zainab who broke the silence. "The small hut near the sacred grove is empty," she said, though her eyes were wary. "Since old Mama Aisha passed, no one will live there. They say it's haunted." Bilamissèn's smile widened. "I fear no ghosts, only the living can harm you." And so it was settled, though uneasily. As Bilamissèn followed Mama Zainab toward the edge of town, the market's noise slowly returned, but now it was punctuated by whispers and speculative glances. The hut stood apart from the main village, nestled against the dark line of the forbidden forest. It was small, made of mud bricks with a thatched roof that needed repair. Inside, it was dark and smelled of dust and old herbs. "It needs work," Mama Zainab said, watching Bilamissèn's reaction carefully. "It will do," Bilamissèn replied, running a hand over the rough wall. "Thank you." As Mama Zainab left, she paused at the doorway. "People here are traditional. They don't trust what they don't understand." Bilamissèn's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Then I will have to make them understand me." That first week, Bilamissèn kept to herself. She repaired the hut, gathering reeds for the roof and mud for the walls. She cleared the small garden behind the house, though what she planted no one could say. Sometimes, late at night, neighbors would see the glow of her oil lamp and hear the soft, constant shaka-shoko of her beads as she moved about her home. The children were the first to approach her. Little Aisha, brave and curious, brought her a basket of oranges from her mother's tree. "For you," Aisha said, staring wide-eyed at the beautiful stranger. Bilamissèn accepted the gift with a smile that made the child blush. "Thank you, little one. Would you like to learn about healing plants? And so began Bilamissèn's integration into Baffo society through the children. She showed them which leaves could heal fever, which roots could settle a troubled stomach. She never asked for payment, only occasional help in her garden or company on her walks. But it was the men who watched her most closely. They noted the sway of her hips, the way her beads seemed to sing just for them. They saw how her wrapper clung to her curves, how her bare back glistened in the sun when she worked in her garden. Dada the cloth merchant was the first to succumb. Dada was a solid man, respected in the community. He had a wife, 3 children, and a business that had been in his family for generations. He was known for his sharp mind and sharper bargaining skills. But when Bilamissèn came to his shop to buy fabric, he found himself offering her his finest Dutch wax print at cost price. "My wife will skin me alive," he muttered to his assistant as he watched her walk away, the beads singing their siren song. That evening, Dada found himself standing outside Bilamissèn's hut as the sun set. Fireflies danced in the growing darkness, and the air was thick with the scent of night-blooming flowers. "Come in, Dada," she called from within, though he had made no sound to announce himself. The hut was neat and clean, with herbs hanging from the rafters and a small fire crackling in the hearth. Bilamissèn sat on a low stool, grinding something with a stone pestle. "You are troubled," she said, not looking up from her work. Dada, who had never spoken of his worries to anyone, found the words pouring out. He spoke of his debts, his wife's disappointment in him, his fear that he would never be the man his father had been. He spoke of dreams deferred and opportunities missed. Bilamissèn listened, her strong hands never pausing in their work. When he finished, she looked up, her dark eyes seeming to see straight into his soul. "Come," she said, rising and taking his hand. "Let me show you how to forget your troubles." She led him to her sleeping mat in the corner. The air grew thick with the scent of wildflowers and something else, something wild and dangerous. As she untied her wrapper, Dada's eyes fell to the waist beads. They seemed to pulse in the firelight, the colors shifting and swirling. He reached for them, his fingers trembling. She caught his hand. "No," she said firmly, though her voice remained sweet. "The beads stay on, they are what make me special." Dada, whose mind had grown foggy with desire and the strange herbs burning in the fire, simply nodded. That night he dreamed of running through endless forests, of swimming in moonlit rivers, of women with jeweled eyes dancing around ancient trees. When he woke in his own bed the next morning, he couldn't remember how he got there. But he could still hear the shaka-shoko of Bilamissèn's beads, and he knew with certainty that he would visit her again. The next day, Dada's wife Amina knew something was wrong. Her husband moved through the house like a ghost, his eyes distant, his mind elsewhere. When she served his favorite breakfast of akara and pap, he barely touched it. "Are you ill?" she asked, placing a concerned hand on his forehead. He brushed her away. "I'm fine, just tired." But Amina knew her husband. This was more than tiredness. This was possession. Meanwhile, the town's women watched Bilamissèn with growing suspicion. They saw how their husbands' eyes followed her when she passed. They saw the gifts she received, a basket of eggs from the farmer, a bolt of cloth from the merchant, a string of fish from the fisherman's best catch. Adama, whose husband had started visiting Bilamissèn for headaches, went to the elders. "This woman is trouble," she said, her voice tight with anger and fear. "She needs to leave Baffo." But the elders, all men, dismissed her concerns. "She has done nothing wrong," said Elder Jacob. "She heals the sick, teaches the children. Would you drive away such a person because some men cannot control their eyes?" Frustrated, the women began their own watch. They noted who visited Bilamissèn's hut and when. They saw Dada slip away 3 times in 1 week. They saw the young teacher from the school bring her books. They saw even the imam's son loitering near her garden. But Bilamissèn seemed unaware of, or unconcerned by, the growing tension. She continued her work, gathering herbs in the forest, treating the sick, smiling her enigmatic smile. One afternoon, Fatima the potter's daughter brought her a newly fired water pot. "It's for you," Fatima said, "to thank you for helping my little brother." Bilamissèn accepted the gift, running her fingers over the intricate patterns. "You have talent, little one. Your hands know the language of the earth." Fatima blushed with pleasure. "My grandmother taught me. She said the clay speaks to those who listen." "Your grandmother was wise." Bilamissèn's eyes grew distant. "My grandmother also taught me many things." "What things?" Fatima asked, her curiosity overcoming her manners. But Bilamissèn only smiled. "Another time, perhaps." That evening, disaster struck. Dauda's largest warehouse, filled with expensive imported fabrics, caught fire. The flames rose high into the night sky, turning silk and cotton to ash. The whole town turned out to fight the blaze, passing buckets of water hand to hand, but the fire was too fierce. As the building collapsed in a shower of sparks, Dauda stood watching, his face pale and stunned. "How?" he whispered. "I checked everything before I left." Bilamissèn stood at the edge of the crowd, her face illuminated by the flickering light. There was no sympathy in her expression, only a kind of cold curiosity. When Dauda saw her, their eyes met for a moment. In that moment, he saw not the woman he had been with just nights before, but a stranger whose eyes held ancient secrets and no remorse. The next day, 2 of Dauda's trucks broke down on their way to Lagos with urgent deliveries. Then his best customer canceled a large order. Then his wife, discovering where he had been spending his evenings, took their children and went to her parents' village. Within a month, Dauda, once the richest and most respected merchant in Baffo, was bankrupt and alone. He would spend his days sitting outside the ruined warehouse, staring at nothing, the word "why" forever on his lips. And Bilamissèn, she continued to walk through the market, her beads singing their soft song, her beauty undiminished. She smiled at the men who watched her with hungry eyes, and they, forgetting Dauda's fate, smiled back. For the story of Baffo and the beautiful stranger was only just beginning, and the worst was yet to come. The ruin of Dauda the merchant sent ripples of fear and fascination through Baffo. In the shade of the ancient baobab tree where the elders gathered, in the chatter of women drawing water from the well, in the hushed conversations of men sharing palm wine, Bilamissèn's name was now spoken with a mixture of awe and dread. Chief Mamadou, ruler of Baffo, heard these stories with growing unease. At 65 years, his hair had silvered, his steps had slowed, but his mind remained sharp, his authority unquestioned. Seated on his carved wooden throne in the palace courtyard, he listened as his advisors debated what to do about the mysterious woman at the edge of town. "She has brought misfortune upon Dauda," said Malam Aliyu, the chief's most trusted counselor. "The people whisper that she is a witch, that her beads carry dark magic." Chief Mamadou stroked his beard thoughtfully. "And what does she say to these accusations?" "She denies nothing, great chief. She only smiles." The chief's eldest wife, Hajia Aisha, entered the chamber, her face tight with concern. "The women are afraid, my husband. They say this Bilamissèn has enchanted the men. Even our own son, Kofi, has been seen loitering near her hut." Chief Mamadou's eyes narrowed. Kofi was a good boy, set to inherit his title, if this woman had set her sights on his son. "I will speak to her myself," the chief declared. A murmur of surprise went through the room. For the chief to personally visit a stranger, a woman with no family, was unprecedented. "Great chief, is that wise?" Malam Aliyu asked cautiously. "Wisdom comes from facing what one fears," Chief Mamadou replied, though in truth, curiosity burned within him. What kind of woman could bring a wealthy merchant to ruin with nothing but a smile? And so, that evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Chief Mamadou made his way to Bilamissèn's hut. He carried his ceremonial staff, its carved head representing the wisdom of his ancestors, and wore his finest robe as a symbol of his authority. He found her in her garden, harvesting leaves from a plant he didn't recognize. She didn't look up as he approached, though the crunch of his staff on the dry earth announced his presence. "Great Chief," she said finally, still not looking at him, "what brings you to my humble home?" "I hear stories," he said, leaning on his staff. "They say you have brought misfortune to daughter the merchant." Now she looked up, and Chief Mamadou felt something shift in his chest. Her beauty was even more striking up close, but it was her eyes that held him, ancient eyes in a young face, eyes that had seen things he could only imagine. "Daughter brought misfortune upon himself," she said calmly. "A man who abandons his family for a stranger deserves what comes to him." The chief nodded slowly. There was wisdom in her words. "Still," he said, "the town is uneasy. As their leader, I must ensure peace." Bilamissèn stood, wiping her hands on her wrapper. "Then you should come inside, great chief, so we can speak of peace." Inside the hut, the air was thick with the scent of strange herbs. Bunches of dried plants hung from the rafters, and clay pots filled with mysterious substances lined the shelves. She served him palm wine in a carved gourd, and as they talked, Chief Mamadou found himself telling her things he had never shared with anyone: his fears about his legacy, his worries that his sons were not ready to lead, his secret shame about the neighboring village his grandfather had conquered long ago. Bilamissèn listened, her beads making soft sounds as she moved. "Shaka shoko, shaka shoko." "You carry heavy burdens," she said softly, "but I can help you carry them." She moved closer, and the chief caught the scent of her, wildflowers and something else, something wild and dangerous. "My beads," she whispered, seeing his eyes drift to her waist. "They hold ancient magic. They can make a man young again, powerful again." Chief Mamadou, who had resisted many temptations in his long life, found he couldn't resist this one. His hand reached for the beads. "No," she said, catching his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "The beads must stay on. They are what channel the power." That night Chief Mamadou dreamed he was young again, running through the forests of his youth, his muscles strong, his heart pounding with life. When he woke, he felt better than he had in years. But in the days that followed, strange things began to happen in Baffo. First, the sacred drum in the chief's compound cracked for no reason, a bad omen that sent whispers through the town. Then the oldest baobab tree in the town square, which had stood for centuries, suddenly withered and died. The elders looked at each other with worried eyes, remembering the stories of Dauda's downfall. Chief Mamadou, however, seemed not to notice. He spent more and more time with Bilamissèn, neglecting his duties. When important decisions needed to be made, he was unavailable. When disputes required his judgment, he delegated them to others. His senior wife, Hajia Aisha, tried to reason with him. "The people are talking, my husband. They say this woman has bewitched you." The chief waved her away impatiently. "Nonsense. She is a healer, a wise woman. You are just jealous." Hajia Aisha's eyes filled with tears. In 30 years of marriage, her husband had never spoken to her so harshly. Meanwhile, Bilamissèn's influence grew. She began wearing expensive fabrics and gold jewelry, gifts, people whispered from the chief. She walked through the market with a new confidence, her beads singing their hypnotic song, her eyes scanning the crowd as if looking for her next victim. One afternoon, young Fatima the potter approached her again. "The town is afraid," Fatima said boldly. "They say you are a witch." Bilamissèn's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Do they? And what do you say, little potter?" "I say that since you came, misfortune follows the men who visit you. Dauda is ruined. Now the chief neglects his people. What will happen next?" Bilamissèn's expression hardened. "You should be careful, girl. Curiosity killed the cat." That night the chief's compound was awakened by screams. One of his young wives had seen a shadowy figure with glowing eyes near Bilamissèn's hut. When guards investigated, they found nothing. But the next morning the town's main well, the one that never ran dry, even in the worst drought, was found empty. Not low, but completely dry, as if it had never held water. Panic spread through Baffo. The elders gathered in emergency meeting. "The chief is under her spell," said Elder Jacob, who had been Mamadou's friend since childhood. "We must act." But before they could decide what to do, disaster struck. A group of armed men from a neighboring village, longtime rivals of Baffo, attacked at dawn. Without Chief Mamadou's leadership, he was with Bilamissèn, some said, the town's defense was disorganized. Though Baffo's warriors eventually drove the attackers away, 5 young men lay dead. The town erupted in anger. They marched to the chief's compound, demanding he come out. When Chief Mamadou finally emerged, he looked years older, his eyes haunted. "My people," he began, but his voice was weak. "It is time for you to step down, old man," shouted a young farmer whose brother had died in the attack. "You care more for that witch than for your own people." The crowd roared in agreement. That night Chief Mamadou abdicated his throne, handing power to his eldest son. As he packed his belongings, he looked toward Bilamissèn's hut one last time. She stood in her doorway watching him. There was no sympathy in her eyes, only cold satisfaction. The next morning, the new chief's first act was to banish Bilamissèn from Baffo. But she simply smiled. "I will go," she said, "but I will take something with me." No one understood what she meant until later, when they discovered that the town's treasury, generations of gold and jewels, had vanished. And Bilamissèn, she was gone, leaving behind only the memory of her beauty and the echo of her waist beads. But Baffo's troubles were far from over. The rains failed Baffo that year. The earth cracked like broken pottery and the river shrank to a muddy trickle. The elders said the land was mourning, the gods were angry, but in hushed tones the women whispered another name, Bilamissèn. She had been gone for 3 moons, but her presence lingered like a phantom limb. The market women still made protective signs when passing her abandoned hut. Mothers pulled their sons close when strangers passed through town. And the men who had known her, those who had survived, walked with a permanent stoop, as if carrying the weight of their poor choices. Into this wounded town came Bello. Bello was not from Baffo. He was a traveling blacksmith, known in distant villages for his skill with metal and his quiet nature. He arrived with the harmattan wind, his tools rattling on the back of a patient donkey, his eyes missing nothing. He was a broad-shouldered man with hands scarred by fire and metal, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. He set up his forge near the ruins of Bilamissèn's hut, a place others avoided. The children, ever curious, would gather to watch the magic he wrought with fire and hammer. The way red-hot metal yielded to his will, the dance of sparks like fireflies in the twilight, the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil that echoed through the quiet afternoons. Fatima, the potter's daughter, was among the first to approach him. She brought him water in a clay pot she had made herself, its surface etched with patterns of river and reed. "You shouldn't stay near that hut," she warned, her voice low. "A witch lived there. She destroyed good men." Bello wiped sweat from his brow with a rag, his eyes thoughtful. "Witches fear iron," he said simply, nodding toward his anvil. "And honest work." But Fatima saw how his gaze lingered on the abandoned structure, thoughtful and unafraid. Days turned into weeks. Bello repaired plows and sharpened knives. He fixed the new chief's ceremonial sword without asking for payment. He helped old Mama Zara mend her cooking pots, and when she had no money, he accepted a bowl of groundnut soup instead, sharing stories of distant lands as they ate. The town began to trust him. They learned he came from a line of blacksmiths, that his grandfather had taught him not just to shape metal, but to read the secrets in fire and smoke. They learned he was a widower, that he traveled not just for work, but to outpace memories that haunted him. One evening, as Bello worked late by the glow of his forge, A figure emerged from the shadows between the trees. She moved silently, but the sound gave her away, that soft, unmistakable shakashoko that made the night insects fall silent. Bilamissèn had returned. She was more beautiful than the stories had described, her skin glowing in the firelight, her movements fluid as water. But Bello saw what others missed, the coldness behind her smile, the calculation in her eyes that measured a man's weaknesses before his strengths. "You are the blacksmith," she said, her voice like honey and thunder mixed. Bello nodded, not stopping his work. "I am. I have something for you to fix." She held out a broken silver bracelet, intricately carved with symbols he didn't recognize. "They say you are the best." Bello took the bracelet. It was cool against his palm, too cool for a night so warm. "This is not ordinary silver." Bilamissèn's smile widened but didn't reach her eyes. "You are clever. It was my grandmother. She was a woman of power." Bello met her gaze steadily. Some power is not meant to be wielded. For a moment her mask slipped and he saw the anger beneath. Then it was gone, replaced by sweet concern. "You work too hard. You should rest. Let me bring you food tomorrow." She left as silently as she had come, her waist beads singing their haunting song. True to her word, she returned the next day with a bowl of spicy jollof rice, rich with chicken and spices that made his mouth water. She watched as he ate, her eyes never leaving his face. "You are not like the other men in this town," she observed. "You see things, you understand power." Bello set down the empty bowl. "I understand balance and consequence." Bilamissèn moved closer. The scent of wildflowers and danger filled the air between them. "What if I told you there are no consequences for those who know the right secrets? What if I could give you power beyond your dreams?" Bello's eyes dropped to her waist beads. They seemed to pulse in the afternoon light, the colors shifting like living things. "And what would this power cost?" "Nothing you would not gladly give." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Come to my hut tonight, let me show you." That night Bello stood outside Bilamissèn's rebuilt hut. The moon was full, casting silver light on the parched earth. From inside, he could hear the soft sound of her beads, a rhythm that seemed to sync with the beating of his own heart. She welcomed him dressed in fine silk that clung to her curves, her hair loose around her shoulders like a dark waterfall. The hut was lit by a single oil lamp that cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the hanging herbs seem like strange, suspended creatures. "You came," she said, smiling as she poured palm wine into a carved gourd. "I have questions," Bello replied, his voice calm despite the strange energy in the room. She handed him the wine. "Ask. Why this town? Why these men?" Her smile tightened. "They were greedy, weak. They got what they deserved." "And what do you get?" Her eyes glittered in the lamplight. "Power. With every man who falls, I grow stronger. Soon I will be unstoppable." Bello sipped his wine. It was sweet, too sweet, with an aftertaste like burnt herbs. "And the beads, what is their purpose?" "They focus the energy. They collect what I need." She moved closer, her hand resting on his arm. Her touch was cool despite the warmth of the night. "But enough talk. Let me show you pleasure you have never known." As she leaned in, Bello's eyes fell to the beads. They seemed to writhe against her skin, hungry. "Take them off," he said quietly. Bilamissèn froze. "What?" "The beads, take them off." Her smile vanished, replaced by something cold and sharp. "No, they stay on. They make everything sweeter." Bello stood, setting down the wine. "Then I will leave." For the first time, Bilamissèn looked uncertain. No man had ever refused her. "You don't mean that. I can feel your desire." "Desire is not destiny," Bello said, "and I will not be another one of your victims." Anger flashed in her eyes. "You think you're better than them. You're a common blacksmith." "I am a man who knows the difference between power and corruption." He turned to leave. "Wait," there was panic in her voice now. Please, just tonight with the beads on, you'll understand afterward. Bello looked at her, truly looked, and saw not a powerful witch, but a desperate woman trapped by her own hunger. No, he said firmly, the price is too high. As he walked away, Bilamissèn screamed, a sound of pure fury that seemed to shake the very air. The oil lamp went out. The temperature dropped so suddenly his breath misted before him. But Bello didn't look back. The next morning the whole town knew what had happened. Bilamissèn had been refused, and her power had been challenged. And for the first time since her arrival, the people of Baffo began to hope. Bilamissèn's power began to fray like old cloth in a storm. The morning after Bello's refusal, she appeared in the market, her beauty undiminished but her eyes wild with a desperate energy. She tried to smile at the men, to lure them with lowered lashes and sweet promises, but they remembered Bello's courage and looked away. Her waist beads, once melodic, now sounded harsh and discordant. Shaka Shoko became cricricri, like stones grinding in an empty pot. She went to Sani the carpenter, who had always watched her with undisguised hunger. "Come to my hut tonight," she whispered, her voice like velvet. "I will make you the happiest man in Baffo." But Sani remembered Dauda's ruin and Chief Mamadou's fall. He remembered Bello's quiet strength. "No," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "I have a family." She tried the young teacher from the city, the wealthy cattle trader, even the new chief's handsome son. All refused. With each rejection, Bilamissèn seemed to shrink. Her glowing skin grew pale. Her confident walk became a shuffle. The beads around her waist grew dull, their colors fading like flowers in the harsh sun. Meanwhile, Bello continued his work. He knew she would come for him again, and he prepared. He studied the symbols on the silver bracelet she had given him, consulting with old Mama Amina, who knew the ancient ways. He worked at his forge late into the night, shaping something special, a simple iron knife, but carved with symbols that mirrored those on the bracelet, symbols of binding and breaking. 1 week after his refusal, Bilamissèn came to his forge one last time. She looked desperate, her beauty now sharp and dangerous, like a blade left too long in the sun. "You have ruined everything," she hissed, her eyes burning with hatred. "They fear me because of you." Bello kept working, hammering a piece of red-hot metal. "They fear you because they finally see you. I offered you power, I offered you pleasure. You offered me corruption." Bello set down his hammer. "The beads, Bilamissèn, what are they really?" She laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You want to know? They are my grandmother's legacy. For every man who lies with me while I wear them, I take his luck, his strength, his future. I grow younger, more powerful. She touched the beads almost lovingly. "They store the life I steal." Bello nodded, as if he had expected this. "And how many men have you destroyed?" 20, she whispered, her eyes gleaming with pride and madness. "I need 21 to complete the transformation, to become immortal. You were supposed to be the last." Bello picked up the iron knife he had been working on, the one carved with ancient symbols. "There will be no 21st, he said. With a scream of rage, Bilamissèn lunged at him, but Bello was ready. He sidestepped her attack and with a quick, precise movement, brought the knife down on her waist beads. The sound they made as they broke was unlike anything Baffo had ever heard, a shriek of tearing magic, of dying power. The beads exploded outward, scattering across the ground like dead insects. Bilamissèn collapsed, writhing in the dust. "What have you done?" she wailed. "What have you done?" As the townspeople gathered, drawn by the noise, they watched in horror as Bilamissèn began to change. Her smooth skin wrinkled like drying fruit. Her dark hair turned white as ash. Her straight back bent with age. Within minutes, the beautiful young woman was gone, replaced by a crone with bitter eyes and a trembling mouth. "The power is gone," old Mama Amina said, emerging from the crowd. "The stolen years have returned to their owners." And as she spoke, strange things began to happen throughout Baffo. Dauda the merchant, sitting in the dust where he begged, suddenly felt strength return to his limbs. He stood, his mind clear for the first time in months. In a neighboring village, Chief Mamadou, working as a servant in his cousin's house, felt the weight of shame lift from his shoulders. He looked at his hands and saw they were no longer trembling. All across the region, men whom Bilamissèn had ruined felt a change, a return of hope, of clarity, of purpose. The crone that had been Bilamissèn looked up at Bello, her eyes filled with hatred. "You have destroyed me." "No," Bello said quietly. "You destroyed yourself long before I came." The people of Baffo didn't know what to do with the broken woman. She was no longer a threat, but her crimes remained. It was Fatima who showed mercy. "Let her go," she said. "Let her live with what she has become." So they did. Bilamissèn gathered her few belongings and shuffled out of Baffo, heading toward the distant hills from which she had come. None followed her, and none ever saw her again. That night the rains finally came. They began as a soft patter on dry roofs, then grew into a downpour that washed the dust from the leaves and filled the river once more. The next morning, Bello packed his tools onto his donkey. His work in Baffo was done. "Will you stay?" Fatima asked, her eyes hopeful. Bello smiled. "I am a traveling blacksmith, but perhaps I will return." As he walked away from Baffo, the sound of his donkey's bells mingled with the cheerful voices of children playing in the newly filled river. The town was healing, and for the first time in a long time, the future looked bright. And somewhere in the distant hills, an old woman whispered to the empty air, remembering power lost and lessons learned too late.